the different current types, and then now we're going to go through the actual waveforms that some of those currents produce and what they deal with. We'll start with pulse current and start to identify some of the things that make pulse current. And then we'll work our way down the line through the rest of chapter 11 to try to get to the end of this. Okay. Okay. So, under waveforms, it talks about a waveform being a visual representation of an actual pulse or a pulse event. So we're able to chart what the pulse looks like, just like we're able to chart what direct current looks like we're able to chart what alternating current looks like. We'll be able to chart what pulse current looks like based on some very specific attributes of the pulse current. So every pulse current will have certain attributes that we can use that's going to help us to describe it. Okay? So, the book lets us know a waveform is simply what you see here. It's a spatial drawing dealing with amplitude, your y-axis, and dealing with duration, which is your x-axis or time. Duration is just another word for time. So we have amplitude and time. Those are the two characteristics that we'll be describing most often. And then we'll go into more specific things with that. But when we're describing it for right now, we're describing it based on amplitude, time. So it says pulses are going to be classified by how many phases it has. So unlike direct current or alternating current, which doesn't have, so direct current doesn't have but one phase. It's going to go in one direction. It doesn't have, alternating will have two phases, above and below the isoelectric line. A pulse current can either be monophasic, it can be biphasic, or it can be polyphasic. So the number of pulses will dictate the number of phases dictates the type of pulse. So phases dictate pulse. So am I dealing with monophasic? Am I dealing with biphasic? Am I dealing with polyphasic? So a monophasic means that the entire event takes place either above or below the isoelectric line or above the zero line. So that's what you're seeing here, monophasic. All of this is taking place above this zero isoelectric line. So it's above all of the event of this waveform is above the isoelectric line. It sits above the isoelectric line. So the black line here is the isoelectric line. It's above it. It could also be below it. If this was underneath it, it could be that. So it could be above or below. It could be positive or negative. It doesn't always have to be positive above the isoelectric line. It could be negative. But it's only going to have one position, either above or below the isoelectric line. Monophasic. And it's only going to be one waveform. So for that 1 second interval, we're only going to see one waveform or one phase of wave. So the end of this represents that 1 second interval. All the way out here toward the end, that represents the 1 second interval. So in that 1 second interval, there's only going to be one phase. It's monophase. Whereas biphasic have two phases, one above and one below the isoelectric line. So biphasic have an event above the iso and below the isoelectric line that's connected. But they still won't last for a full 1 second. There's going to be a break in them. So it's always a break. Okay. And then polyphasics have multiple phases occurring above and below the isoelectric line. So this one has 3, but it can have 3 or 4 or 6. It can be multiple. It's up to the manufacturer how they're programming it relating to polyphasic. So the thing about these, the waveform types, we don't create these. All we do is select these. All of these are going to be predetermined by the manufacturer. So write that in your notes. We are not selecting these. We don't control this. These are predetermined by the manufacturer. Right, the phases of the waveform. So the waveforms and the phases. So the manufacturer will determine if their device is an AC-based waveform, an AC-based unit, a DC-based unit, or if it's a pulsatile current unit, if the pulse currents they offer are monophasic, or biphasic, or polyphasic. So the manufacturer determines all of this. We don't get to choose this. We get to choose the different type of waveforms, and we'll talk about why we would choose one over the other one, but we don't get to set these. This is preset by the manufacturer. Okay. All right. Okay. So pre-select. So down underneath that, it says waveforms are diagrammatic only and rarely reflect what the patient is actually experiencing. So the patient is just going to experience the current. It may be preset to do these, but they're not going to feel it that way. They're just going to feel electrical current. We choose them based on what goal we're trying to accomplish. So different waveforms accomplish different objectives. So we choose a waveform to accomplish our objective, but our patient isn't going to be able to decipher, oh, that's polyphasic, oh, that's biphasic, oh, that's monophasic. They won't be able to tell. It's all going to be packaged and delivered to feel the same to the patient. So they won't know. You will know because it's going to be specific to why you're using it for your treatment. So we'll dive deeper into that once we get further along. Okay. So down at the bottom of that, it says oscilloscopes are devices used to monitor electrical waveforms, and they can visualize what is actually happening. So you can connect it to an oscilloscope. We don't do that. We don't have any desire to go that deep into it. We will choose ours based on the objective of what we're trying to accomplish. So monophasic, biphasic, polyphasic. Okay. Alrighty. So the book tells us under monophasic again, a monophasic pulse will have just one phase. So it's just going to have this one phase. The pulse is going to be unidirectional from the baseline, and it can either be positive or negative. So I just as much could have a monophasic waveform that looks like this, and I could just as easily have a monophasic waveform that looks like this on the isoelectric line. So this is going to be positive. This is going to be negative. So it could be positive or negative, but it's unidirectional, similar to DC, but the main difference between it and DC is it's going to interrupt. It's going to end before this 1 second interval. So somewhere in there, it's going to end before the 1 second interval. Okay. All right. It says, unlike DC, because it interrupts, it will not have negative effects underneath the electrode relating to skin issues. So I'm not worried about pulse current burning the skin because it has interrupting properties. Because it interrupts, we're not worried about it carrying a charge long enough to damage the skin. Okay. 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 All right. I don't want to go into too much of that. Okay. So the next waveform type we could have, other than monophasic, is we can have biphasic waveforms. Biphasic. This is where we start to dive into some specifics relating to well, I tell you what, let's go to polyphasic again, and then we'll come back to biphasic. Polyphasic means it's comprised of 3 or more phases, and they are felt and they are released from the device like bursts. So it's going to feel like it's going to be like bursts of electrical energy. So, but it still will feel the same to the patient as if I was using monophasic or biphasic, but it's released from the machine as burst. Okay. It says the burst is perceived by the body as a single pulse. So again, it's all going to feel the same to the patient. We're only choosing these based on our objective for using E-stim with this patient type. What are we trying to accomplish? But your patient is going to feel the same thing, no matter if we use monophasic, biphasic, polyphasic. Patient's going to feel the same thing. It won't be discernible to them. Like they won't be able to go, that's a biphasic waveform you're using. They won't know. It'll be the same. It's all going to feel like E-stim. Once we depolarize the nerve, it's going to be, it's all going to feel the same based on us depolarizing that nerve. Okay. It says it behaves physiologically as a single pulse and has no physiological advantages over a single pulse. Okay. So that's the thing about polyphasic. So it'll just be multiple phases, but it's still going to be felt by the body as one phase. Now, let's go back to biphasic, because biphasic has different things that it can be. It doesn't just have to be biphasic. Well, let's say this. It can be biphasic with extra components. So it says biphasic is going to be bidirectional with 2 phases. One phase is going to be positive. The other phase will be negative, similar to AC. Biphasic can be divided into symmetrical biphasic, which is the first thing. And the word symmetry means they match. Anytime something is symmetrical, it matches. When you buy 2 shoes, you want them to be symmetrical. You buy a pair of shoes, you don't want one to be a 9 and one to be a 17. You want symmetry, unless you have very odd feet. You tend to want your shoes to have symmetry. Pant legs, you want them to have symmetry. You don't want one to be one length and the other one unhemmed. You want symmetry. You want them to match. That's biphasic symmetrical. The phases will match. So this phase matches this phase. The only difference is one is above the isoelectric line, one is below the isoelectric line. Above, below. But the design matches specifically. So that's symmetrical biphasic. We will call that symmetrical biphasic. Symmetrical biphasic. The phases match, they're symmetrical. Similar to AC, the main difference is it's going to interrupt before that 1 second. Excuse me. We can also have asymmetrical biphasic waveforms, meaning that they don't match, but they do have, they don't match. Now, they cannot match and still last the same amount of time on their isoelectric line, meaning start to finish, like this start and this finish is the same as this start and this finish. So even though the phases don't match, one's triangle and one's square, how long they are actually lasting is actually the same. So we call this biphasic asymmetrical because they're not symmetrical, but they are balanced. They last the same amount of time on the isoelectric line. So this is biphasic asymmetrical balanced. They don't look the same. They have asymmetry in the way that they look, but they are balanced. They last the same amount of time on the isoelectric line. Biphasic asymmetrical balanced is what that's called. Then we have biphasic, again, asymmetrical. These two are asymmetrical, and they are unbalanced. It does not last the same amount of time on the isoelectric line. So one is much shorter versus the other one in their length of time that they last. So with pulsed current, so monophasic and polyphasic can only be named those, monophase or polyphasic. Biphasic can be biphasic symmetrical, biphasic asymmetrical but balanced. So biphasic asymmetrical balanced or biphasic asymmetrical unbalanced. And again, all of this is preset by the manufacturer. We don't get to dictate this, whether it's balanced or unbalanced, monophasic or biphasic. We can choose to use, depending on what device, if we want to use certain pulse currents, but we don't get to dictate how they're designed. That's done by the manufacturer. And just like with polyphasic, it's felt by your patient just like one pulse. So your patients won't know the difference. You will, and you'll choose certain things based on what your goals are. So I'm gonna keep saying that. I choose waveforms based on what my goals are. Currents and waveforms are things I choose based on what my goals are and patient comfort. You will select those based on what your goals are and trying to accomplish patient comfort. So those are the things we can have relating to pulse current. It can be monophasic, it can be polyphasic, it can be biphasic symmetrical, biphasic asymmetrical balance, biphasic asymmetrical unbalanced. Okay. Okay. So, page 280, phase versus pulse. Again, it's good to see this again. It says the physiological effect of current on tissue is determined by the phase, not the pulse. So the phase is the whole event. It doesn't care about how many pulses. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-mm-mm. Okay. Yeah. So essentially, I don't want to go into that. Let's go into waveform comfort. Let's do that. I don't want to get you confused there, because I think you're saying it backwards. It's really pulse versus phase. Your patient is only going to feel the pulse. They're not going to be able to determine how many phases they're feeling. They're just going to know it feels like E-stim. So it's really going to be pulse over phase, not phase over pulse. So don't get confused there. So don't worry about that paragraph. Waveform comfort. So this is the reason why we choose certain things. This is what I was trying to get to. It says many studies have investigated comfort levels of different waveforms. The symmetrical biphasic waveform is cited as preferred more often. So all of the clinical studies that they do on E-stim, patients say for patient comfort, the waveform that they think is the most comfortable is using symmetrical biphasic. So this is the most commonly chosen patient comfort waveform. Now that may be right, that may be true for you, and that may not be true for you. We're going to test that theory. So that's what we do here. We test stuff. So it tells us that. It says in comparisons among symmetrical biphasic, asymmetrical, balanced biphasic, monophasic, and polyphasic, biphasic was most often preferred. Between the two biphasics, symmetrical was preferred with stimulation of large muscles, whereas there was no preference between small muscle stimulation. One conclusion is that there is a variety of preferences in patients. So symmetrical biphasic is liked by patients, but there's a large variety. Ultimately, this is one of the best sentences you'll read. Therefore, if one waveform is not tolerated, another one should be tried before abandoning E-stim as a treatment intervention. Highlight, star, circle, E-I-E-I-O, that one. Because that's the whole concept of what this class is about. It's helping you figure out what are other ways we can make this comfortable for our patient. Especially if we know E-stim is going to be something that's going to help them get better. There are times where this actually helps people get better faster. So if I know this is a technique that's going to help my patient, I want to do everything I can to make it comfortable so they can tolerate it, so we can get them better. So that's our whole objective. If the waveform I'm using isn't working, try another one. As long as it accomplishes what I'm trying to do. It says preferences for different types of E-stim can also vary in different muscle groups. Clinicians need to be mindful of the outcomes, and remember, patients do not understand the rationale a lot of times. They just want to be comfortable. Okay? So, waveform selection. This is the next paragraph that's good. All waveforms are basically effective at activating peripheral nerves. So superficial nerves, just about every waveform will what's the word I'm looking for? Just about every waveform that we're talking about will depolarize a sensory or cutaneous nerve. No matter which one we use, they have the ability to depolarize a sensory or cutaneous nerve. But we have to be mindful of its ability to stimulate that with the minimum amount of electrical charge. That's the other side. Yes, it can do it, but I don't want it to have to be on full blast to do it. I want it to be at a level comfortable for my patient. Symmetrical biphasic, again, meets the qualification without skin resections. It is found that although symmetrical biphasic is preferred on large and small muscles, when used on stimulations with small muscle, it is not discrete in its recruitment, and sometimes it can overflow, meaning it's getting into other tissues. Not in a bad way. So it means if I'm trying to isolate my bicep, sometimes using symmetrical biphasic will hit my bicep, and it may overflow into my tricep or my deltoid. So the current overflows, it pours out and doesn't stay specific sometimes. Therefore, asymmetrical balanced biphasic may be a better choice for small muscles. So how do I use it? If I'm using it for large muscle groups, I'll use symmetrical biphasic or some other waveform. If I'm doing small, I'll use asymmetrical or some other waveform. Those are my go-to firsts for what I'm trying to do. So large muscles, symmetrical biphasic; small muscles, asymmetrical biphasic. That's kind of where I wanted to get you to. Okay, so those are the different types of waveforms, so, or current abilities. Again, not all machines will have DC, not all machines will have AC, not all machines will have pulse currents, or they have variations of it. So what are we going to do right now? I'm glad you asked. So now you're going to break off into your groups again, and you're going to investigate the machines that we have. So this time you're going to be plugging up the actual line-in machines. You'll plug those up and use those. Okay. So, what do I want you doing? So you'll plug in the line-in machines. Well, I tell you what. Let's do this first, and then we'll get into this. Let's go here first, and this will make this easier. Before we start that, let me pull up this document so that you'll know what you're looking for. Hang on. Okay, so this is a document that's on Canvas, and it's going to talk about what you will see based on machines and what type of currents are which type. So each of the machine will have with it a manual. Either the manual is online or the manual is with the machine. All the portables, the manuals are with the machine. The big machines, they're online, but you won't need them per se. It'll tell you what they offer. And so we're going to eventually go through these and determine what type of waveforms do each of these offer. So we'll know what variability we can offer our patient. So you need to know what the names are so that it'll make sense. So direct current, again, we already learned what direct current is. Mostly direct current will be found on some of the machines. Primarily, one of the main places you're going to find direct current is with iontophoresis machines. So one of these machines will be an iontophoresis machine, and you'll be able to look through the manual, and it should tell you the current or the waveform type it uses is a direct current. Alternating current or AC current, there are two specific types of alternating currents you'll see on a machine. One is called pre-modulated and one is called Russian. So one is called pre-modulated, one is called Russian. I swear to you, the word Russian is on there. This is not a racist statement. It literally is called Russian. We'll tell you why it's called Russian once we get there. But if you see pre-modulated or Russian, that's a type of AC waveform. So you'll look to see which devices offer AC waveform types and which type they offer. Pulse currents, you'll see things like symmetrical biphasic, asymmetrical biphasic, or high volt pulse current, or VMS, variable muscle stem, or microcurrent. Any of those four are types of pulsed or pulsatile currents. So some of them will offer, or I guess some of them will also offer, let me put that one in. Some of them offer what's called a monophasic current. A monophasic waveform. Yeah, so it can be monophasic, it can be biphasic, symmetrical, asymmetrical, high volt, VMS, microcurrent. All of those are types of pulsatile currents. So what I want you to do, you'll be able to use the portable ones. You're going to break up in groups. So these are the different types of portable ones. You don't have to, so these are out specifically. All of these are the same. So I'm going to put the different ones over here so you can see these. So here, 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 they're all different. Yep, all of these are different types. And then the 2, 4, 5 line ends. So what you're going to do, get your sheet of paper with your groups, plug in the line ends, plug in these, or you don't even have to plug these in. If you go to the manual that goes with them, it'll tell you which type of waveform that this device uses. So when you open it, there should be a manual in here, and you go through the manuals and it'll tell you what type of waveform each of these devices uses here. You'll have to plug those in because the screen will tell you what type of waveforms it offers. All right, so partner up, find out what our devices offer. What are our capabilities? Then we'll go from there.